What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. And today, we're going to be going over the things that we learned and breaking down the entirety of Pro Tour Final Fantasy, Magic's largest standard Pro Tour in terms of the number of cards that were actually legal for the format. Of course, we were going to end up getting that with, of course, standard being extended for another year in terms of the sets that are being released. We're releasing more sets than we've ever seen before. So every subsequent standard Pro Tour was going to be bigger and bigger. But Final Fantasy, I believe, is going to be the last one with the current set of cards, and we're going to have a rotation come Edge of Eternities, which we did also get some pretty sweet spoilers during the event there. So I look forward to kind of going over those in, of course, our own content style on this channel. We're going to be going over those later this week because honestly, some of those spoilers were amazing. Some of the mechanics that they showed looked pretty awesome, and there's a lot of potential for some of the cards very early on that they released, and of course, some really cool promos and stuff too. Like this whole weekend was just, I think, a very, very good thing for Magic the Gathering. Of course, before we get into anything to do with the video, which we're going to be going over the Day 1 metagame, how things went for players in Day 1, the top 8 bracket, which will kind of give you a good indication how Day 2 went. And of course, going over the top 8 bracket, and then just some in general thoughts and opinions, some winners and losers, and, overall just kind of confirming things that we already knew and even getting some confirmation on other things that we weren't really quite sure of from this absolutely amazing event. But before we get into any of that stuff, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we talk mainly about the modern standard formats, as well as all the other happenings going on in Magic the Gathering, whether it is, spoilers from the new set, whether it's different kinds of news and updates and things like that to the game of Magic. If you are interested in any of that stuff, please consider subscribing and ring that notification bell so you know those videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. And if you want even more content, you can go down in the description down below. Join my Discord server down there with the link in the description down below. Follow me on Twitch over at twitch.tv/Carday23. We actually are looking to play in a Modern Showcase coming up on Saturday, so definitely we'll be streaming that over there if you want to go ahead and check that out. Go check out the Casual Spikes Podcast YouTube channel, where me and my co-host Randy over MTG with Randy talk a lot about the happenings going on in competitive Magic, breaking down events, and I'm sure we're going to be doing our own style of breakdown on the Pro Tour, so definitely go ahead and check that out over there. Lastly, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. If you use my code in the description down below, you can save 5% off your monthly subscription. Manatraders is a monthly subscription service through Magic the Gathering Online that you can, or rather, where you're able to rent cards to play on Magic the Gathering Online is probably a better way of putting that. And you can use their service for the longer that you're subscribed, the sooner that you'll get access to newer sets. I believe I may be able to rent cards from the newest set from the day after they're actually released. And it allows you to play all different kinds of decks to figure out what decks that you want to play. And of course, their rental service is incredibly quick, so you're able to rent and play whatever decks you want, whenever you want, as fast as possible. So, like I said, use my code in the description down below. You'll get 5% off your monthly subscription. I want to thank Manatraders for being a sponsor of the channel. Now let's go ahead and get into all the happenings of Pro Tour Final Fantasy. So the very first thing we're going to look at here is the standard metagame. This was the breakdown on the, going into the first day of competition of what players were playing. So we see here 42.3% of the field being Izzet Prowess, 140 decks total. We knew this was going to be the best deck going into the format. Did not think that it would have this high of a metagame share, but here we are. I thought it would be in the top 2. It seemed like it was kind of falling out of favor online, but it definitely showed out for the Pro Tour, and really, that was kind of naive on my part to think that this wouldn't be the most played deck in the field or would only be top 2 or whatever. Anything short of being in that top spot, because this was just the best deck in the tournament. And if you watched any of the Pro Tour, you know that it ended up being absolutely amazing as we kind of went forward. The second most played deck, Azorius Omniscience, almost 20% of the metagame at 66 total decks. This has been the kind of premier combo deck of the format. It's had all the right tools of dealing with the Izzet Prowess decks and to an extent the mono red decks, which we see here in the third spot at 10.9%. And just in general was like a deck that could basically be able to disrupt the opponent and play in tempo and then kind of do its thing on turn 4 and then more than likely end up kind of winning the game the turn it ends up doing its thing. Mono red aggro, of course, has been a staple of the format since the release of Bloomburrow and continues to show how dominant it is here. 36 players registering the deck for a 10.9% share of the field. This has looked like an amazing deck, really through the course of everything, even though Corey Steelcutter is probably the best red card in the format, or arguably shares that spot with Monstrous Rage. This deck does get to play Monstrous Rage, and again, just making a double striking mouse that is just going to be absolutely massive, and then later just explodes in your opponent's face is still pretty good, turns out, here in 2025 Standard. Next, we have Domain Overlords. This deck just refuses to go away. It has won 2 different Pro Tours and looks to try to claim a 3rd title here. Dimir Midrange at the 5th spot at 3.3%. Jun Roots, which has looked like a pretty powerful deck. There's also Gogori Roots showing up here at 1.5%. So actually creating a little bit of a distinction there. But if you do add those together, it actually has more copies of the Roots deck than there is Dimir Midrange. And honestly, like the Gogori Roots deck, spoiler, looked absolutely awesome. Every time it was on camera, it was just doing some really cool things. We have Azorius Control and Orzhov Pixie sharing that spot at 6 decks total. 12 total between the two, 6 and 6, for 1.8% of the field. Orzhov Pixie, of course, being kind of the evolution of these self-bounce decks where they're moving away from blue and even just being just blue-black altogether, and are going for more of a, kind of doing the same thing that a lot of the other white decks are doing. They're trying to play, the temporary lockdowns and the authority of the consoles to slow down the super aggressive decks, while also just getting to reset them at will, and even getting to bounce their own temporary lockdown. They're going to get ETBs from their own powerful things, and then just replay the temporary lockdown and re-lock down a lot of new permanents that your opponent has played. Boros Aggro at 4 copies at 1.2%, and then Jeskai Control being the last deck that shows up on the graphic at 1.2%. Then 31 other decks that are good enough for 9.4% of the field. And I gotta tell you, in that other, there was Paulo Vitor Domodorosa's blue-red Cauldron deck with Vivi, and I tell you what, it looked absolutely awesome. Paulo is easily one of my favorite players of all time. Probably just is my favorite player of all time, and that brew looked absolutely amazing. And I kind of wish he had a little bit better of a tournament, because that would have been sweet to kind of see that deck in the top 8 and see him play, because he's just a fantastic human being and a fantastic player altogether. But in general, my thoughts on this metagame, obviously, it is very skewed. The number 1 deck in the format is more played than the next 3 or 4 decks, probably, just by my quick math. We essentially have 31, 32%, 36, 37, 39. More played than a lot of the other decks past it. This is a very top heavy metagame. We knew Izzet was going to be the best deck in the format, or one of the 2 best decks in the format, and players definitely showed that even through all their testing, that Izzet was just the best choice, even if basically everyone and their mother expected. I'm pretty sure at this point, if you knew absolutely nothing about Magic the Gathering and someone told you to predict what was going to be at the Pro Tour, Izzet Prowess would be the only 2 words that you would know that exist in Magic the Gathering. That and Corey Steelcutter, that's probably it. But everybody and their mom knew that Izzet was going to be at this Pro Tour. It was just going to be if you were going to be, on the dark side, or if you were going to try to build your deck in such a way to actually beat these Izzet decks. And it seems like a lot of players, more than most of them, have decided that, it's just easier to play that deck and go through whatever amount of hate that players are going to try to bring in against you, rather than finding enough hate to actually beat these decks, and tuning your deck in that way to actually beat those matches. And we actually saw quite a bit of varying different flexes in these Izzet Prowess decks too, so that's really sweet there. Azorius Omniscience being the second most played deck is a little bit surprising to me, but it does seem like it has a lot of really nice tools, just being a deck that will kind of do the thing. Temporary Lockdown is a nice answer, but it is not the end-all be-all answer from a lot of the answers that Izzet Prowess has. So just the fact that it's a deck that can play it and isn't reliant on it staying on the battlefield for multiple turns. It's there, so it does its thing for 1 turn. It stops them from, dealing a ton of damage, and only further limits them and what they're able to do, having to start with a very specific answer to be able to deal with it, on top of playing a bunch of spells then to potentially maybe win the game, where it might just end up being a little too slow and then you're able to combo. And of course, Mono Red has been my favorite deck, I think. I really enjoyed playing the Izzet Prowess decks. Corey Steelcutter is an awesome card. Love absolutely playing it in Standard. Love playing it in Modern. But Mono Red just seems super clean, and a lot of players seem to agree with that as well. But that's kind of my thoughts and opinions on the metagame. If you want to, leave your comment down below how you felt about this metagame going into the event. But before, really, with that being said, let's go ahead and check out the standings after day 1 of the Pro Tour Final Fantasy. So here we have the standings from the day one of the event here. So we see at the end of it, Christian Baker was the only 3-0 drafter plus a 5-0 player in constructed here to be 8-0 after day one and being the only undefeated player. Then we have him followed by Alan Fong, Ian Robb, who are on Azorius Omniscience and Is It Prowess respectively. My goodness. Ken Yukihiro on Mono Red Aggro at 4th. Jody Keith on Golgari Graveyard, which was kind of like this deck that, I believe in the previous Pro Tour Aether Drift, we'd seen like Zevin Faust and like that team come up with this Golgari Graveyard deck. And of course, featuring, I believe it was Diamond Weapon from Final Fantasy, just being another big creature that you can play that ended up being very annoying for a lot of the red-based aggro decks to actually deal with. So, that deck was really cool. And of course, just getting to play Up the Beanstalk, probably one of Magic's most powerful cards. Somewhere in probably like the top 100 most powerful cards of all time, I would say. But, here doing very well, 7-1. I believe if it'll show me the individual record. No, it doesn't actually give. Actually doesn't give the. Oh no, it does say who they played, whatever. But nonetheless, doing very well here. Either picking up a loss in constructed or in draft, which I believe might have been in draft. So doing very well there. And then rounding out the top 8 spots, we have Tony Portalone. I hope I probably just butchered that. Playing Is It Prowess. Connor McKenzie also playing Is It Prowess. We have another Azorius Omniscience player, Eli Cassis on Golgari Roots, which is the deck that has looked absolutely awesome. Remy on Is It Prowess. I'm not sure who this player is on Mono Red Aggro. Another Is It Prowess deck, Shota on Is It Prowess. Arani on Is It Prowess, David Rude on Is It Prowess, and then John Roots, another Is It Prowess, Azorius Omniscience, another Is It Prowess, 2 Azorius Omniscience decks, Is It Prowess, Mono Red, Is It Prowess, and Just Guy Control to round out the top 25, and holy shit. Probably what everyone expected, when Is It Prowess has a ton of players in this tournament, and, to be fair, even though Christian Baker was the only player that ended up going undefeated, every time Is It Prowess showed up on camera, except for obviously the 7-0 match, it didn't really look all that great. Is It Prowess just kept losing on camera to basically whoever they played up to this point. And it seemed like maybe Is It Prowess was going to be kind of overhyped for the tournament. Obviously, with as many copies as they had, there was bound to be some amount of players that did very well, unless there was just an absolute, literally all-time collapse of the deck. But that just didn't happen here. Christian Baker being undefeated after, day one of the competition. And even though there's, some other decks kind of thrown in here, we just see a lot of Is It Prowess in here. So definitely sets the stage for the second day of competition, which we will head over to really quickly and see how things kind of rounded out in the final rounds of Pro Tour Final Fantasy. So these are the final standings after the final round of Pro Tour Final Fantasy. Man, how many times can I fit the word final in there? But you'll notice a theme here really quickly. So our top 8 players are Ian Robb on Is It Prowess, Ken Yukihiro on Mono Red Aggro, David Rude on Is It Prowess, Charmander, which I can't remember this player's name, but I know that they were, I believe it was Fang. They were 4th with Mono Red Aggro. Yu Chen Liu, Mono Red Aggro. Tony Portalane on Is It Prowess. Christian Baker on Is It Prowess. And Andy Garcia Romo on Mono Red Aggro here. So it ended up being 4 Mono Red aggro decks and 4 Is It Prowess decks, and something that really cool that happened with how these players actually ended up getting seeded. There was actually 4 Is It Prowess players on one side and then 4 Mono Red aggro players on the other. So there was this kind of mini tournament going on where no matter what, we were going to get Mono Red versus Is It Prowess in the finals. It was just going to be which of the 4 Is It players and which of the 4 Mono Red aggro players were going to duke it out to get there. So, all things considered, when a top 8 that is absolutely not diverse, even in the slightest, or, the minimalist amount of diversity that you can have without having, just only mirror matches or slightly different configurations of a mirror match, it was pretty cool that it kind of worked out that way. On the outside looking in, we have Edgar Magaish on Domain Overlords. Definitely a player that you would recognize on the, Star City Games tour when they were actually doing their own tour and not just the regional championships and the Spotlight Series and things like that. But, Domain Overlords, a very good showing here, just on the outside looking in, just missing on breakers by 0.7%, or else we would have had another a different deck here other than a mono red aggro, but then also ruining our mini tournament of champions through that. So that would be, take the good with the bad, I suppose. Then we have Azorius Omniscience, piloted by Sean Henry at 10th, Mitchell Tamblin on Azorius Control. We have another mono red aggro deck at 12th, Izzet Prowess at 13th, 14th, and 16th, and a mono red aggro at 15th, and that's our top 16 with 2 Azorius Omniscience decks kind of outside looking in. Gogori Roots, piloted by Eli Cassis, Nicholas Odenheimer on Izzet Prowess getting 20th. Then we have 2 mono red players and Azorius Omniscience, Izzet Prowess, and Azorius Omniscience to round out our top 25. So as we kind of just noted there, we have our top 8 where it is 4 Izzet Prowess and 4 mono red, and it's going to be mono red facing only off on mono red until the finals, and then Izzet Prowess facing off only against Izzet Prowess until the finals. So definitely really cool that it worked out that way, all things considered. But, of course, one of them, somebody has to win and 7 others have to lose. So let's go ahead and check out this bracket here, and we'll kind of break down what happened. So here we have the full top 8 bracket. So you can kind of look and see for yourself how things ended up panning out for a lot of players. But we have Ken Yukihiro versus Andy Garcia-Romo, of course, in the mono red aggro mirror, and Ken Yukihiro piloting to a 3-1 victory over Andy to move on to the semifinals, where he had faced the winner of Yu Chen Liu versus Percy Feng, which Yu Chen Liu took it in a very exciting 5 games here to set up Ken Yukihiro versus Yu Chen Liu in the mono red aggro championship. And then on the other side of the bracket, we have David Rude and Tony Portolane, who Tony ended up beating David 3-1, and then Ian Robb absolutely handling Christian Baker in his match there, moving on 3-0 and going on and setting up Tony versus Ian on the Izzet Prowess side of the bracket, and then, of course, Ken versus Yu Chen Liu on the other side of the bracket here. Ken, throughout the entirety of the tournament, has been calling himself the best mono red player in the world, and was up quickly 2-0 on Yu Chen Liu, and then Yu Chen pushed it to 5 games, where Ken ultimately ended up winning. And Ken played some really tight games here in this mono red deck. Of course, that's just kind of how it is when you have 2 hyper aggressive aggro decks against each other. But I mean, just absolutely playing fantastic to end up beating Yu Chen Liu in the semifinals and to move on to the finals, where he would face the winner of Tony Portolane and Ian Robb. And Ian definitely showed mastery of this Izzet Prowess deck and just absolutely drove it home here with a 3-1 victory over Tony to set up Ken Yukihiro, Ian Robb in the finals. Mono red aggro versus Izzet Prowess, our first non-mirror, and usually we only have to wait till about the quarters to get non-mirrors in metagames like this, but again, with kind of how the seeding and everything worked out, we ended up getting all the mono red players versus playing against each other versus all the Izzet Prowess players getting against each other. And of course, as you see here, Ken Yukihiro absolutely handled Ian Robb 3-0, sweeping the finals and winning his first Pro Tour after getting his 8th Pro Tour top 8. Absolutely amazing. And of course, congratulations to Ken Yukihiro, who's a fantastic player, someone that I've watched quite a bit, in my own competitive journey as I've kind of watched more and more Magic from, obviously in the times that we live in now, or live as it was kind of happening, and then going back and watching older Pro Tours. Ken Yukihiro is a name that definitely comes up quite a bit and is an absolutely fantastic player. So not a better player that could have won. Of course, Ian Robb is probably going to have to wait just another Pro Tour because he's been an absolute tear. Back-to-back Pro Tour top 8s, getting eliminated in the quarterfinals of the Pro Tour Aether Drift, and then, of course, coming in and getting to the finals of the Final Fantasy Pro Tour. It's only a matter of time, I think, before Ian ends up converting, but absolutely, dominant performance from him as being one of the first 2 players to qualify, between him and Ken Yukihiro. So this was a 1v2 matchup. But yeah, I mean, overall, you couldn't ask for a more convincing win, I would say, in a Pro Tour finals. And I almost felt like I was rooting for Mono Red the whole time, even though Mono Red might just be just as toxic, if not more toxic than the Izzet Prowess deck, but I just kind of find myself rooting for Ken. Just an absolutely great player. Definitely, all the props to Ian Robb, though, for, taking some pretty cool lines and, having to kind of get creative in that matchup, but ultimately, Ken just played absolutely lights out and definitely showed up when he absolutely needed to claim his first ever Pro Tour title. And, that's how, the event actually shook out from players playing it Overall, as far as the event itself, there were a lot of really cool matches that showed up, but overall, I think what we've learned from this is that Is It Prowess is absolutely here to stay, and we're going to probably see Is It Prowess players try to figure out ways of actually trying to handle the more aggressive draws from the Honored Aggro deck. As it might sound weird that maybe Is It Prowess has to think about making that change when it was it was like 4 times or almost 4 times more played than the mono red aggro decks in the Pro Tour. We could see these Is It Prowess decks kind of try to build to beat mono red and maybe focus a little bit less on some of the other matchups, just because this deck just does absolutely insane things. And, again, props to Ken Yukihiro for just playing mono red aggro instead of just playing Is It Prowess, where I think that was very easy for a lot of players to do, rather than, maybe trusting, not even necessarily trusting our gut, but definitely taking a swing on, trying to beat that deck. So, congratulations again to Ken. And we'll go ahead and wrap up this video with some of our thoughts, opinions, winners and losers, etc. of Pro Tour Final Fantasy. So let's kind of wrap all this up with some general thoughts, some winners and losers and things like that. So we'll start with some winners and losers, as I think obviously some very big winners of the event were, of course, the players that decided to register Is It Prowess to the tournament, especially the players that registered VV. VV ended up being just as good, if not better than advertised. I think in the worst case, it was as good as players thought it would be. Now, there was some tweets I had seen where players either didn't test VV at all, or just didn't think it was that good, or it didn't seem like it was that good in testing. But honestly, a lot of these combos, quote unquote, where you would see VV played on turn 4 with 4 lands in play, you end up then casting Monstrous Rage, or there's another pump spell that gives it +3/+0 and will actually give it haste. So then you actually have a 4-power VV that you'll end up getting to activate and add 4 mana, kind of reminiscent of the days of Magic where we would see things like Wilderness Reclamation and cards like Fires of Invention, where you essentially got that mana back. VV being a little bit harder to kind of pull off because you wanted something like either the haste spell or with Monstrous Rage, but with the upside of being able to cast potentially multiple different spells and make an even bigger creature, and obviously deal a bunch of damage and have VV out of range for a single removal spell, and they would require a multiple combinations of removal spells, because let's be honest, you're probably not blocking with VV because this thing is going to be able to get in and take chunks out of your opponent's life total, on top of just generating an obscene amount of mana in a format where everyone's playing 4 Storm Chaser's Talent, and you're able to kind of loop different spells on top of just eventually your instants and sorceries making a ton of odders. So I think definitely Is It Prowess, even though it came up short and there was a ton of players that ended up playing it, put 4 copies in the top 8. Obviously, Ian Robb played absolutely fantastic the whole weekend and just ran into the juggernaut that was Ken Yukihiro. And, is still probably the best deck in the format. Mono Red does give it a little bit of pause as being the de facto best deck, because we just saw it absolutely handle Is It Prowess in the finals, which felt super anticlimactic, all things considered. But nonetheless, these VV Is It Prowess decks are going to be probably the thing people play for a while here if you're going to be getting into competitive standard. The next winner, and probably the only other winner, is Mono Red. Of course, same deal. It was the 3rd most played deck, put 4 copies in the top 8. Ken Yukihiro absolutely on a tear the whole weekend, between him and Ian Robb being the first 2 players to qualify for the top 8, on top of, again, Ken Yukihiro proclaiming himself to be the best mono red player in the world. And honestly, at least for that weekend, nobody can make an argument that says otherwise. And really probably ever right now, nobody can really make the argument. Just an absolutely stellar weekend for Ken. And really just showing that Mono Red, with some new toys obviously thrown in there, that Mono Red can definitely keep up with these Is It Prowess decks. And even though Is It Prowess is doing a lot of really fancy things and they're willing to play the long game, and they don't really have to play that long of a game either in some cases, and they have super differentiating builds and how many numbers you play, whatever, Mono Red just keeping it simple, and turns out just registering mountains for the weekend. You didn't need islands, you just only needed mountains and a lot of spirit. And for that, congratulations again to Ken Yukihiro, and Mono Red is just going to absolutely be everywhere for as long as we have this mice package and all these other super aggressive cards, because it seems to be quite a bit that came from Final Fantasy that ended up making a splash on the Mono Red deck. Some losers, we have Omniscience Combo. I mean, this was the second most played deck. I believe, at least looking at it, maybe 10th or 11th might have been the highest placing Omniscience deck. Of course, actually losing out to the first Domain deck, which seems kind of weird. I know that a lot of players probably registered Azorius Omniscience to try to beat Is It Prowess, excuse me. And for some players, it obviously did work out. I did see that Canister went like 7-3 in constructed with his build of Azorius Omniscience. And that's totally, totally fine. I'm sure Azorius Omniscience is still going to be a good deck to kind of register, but it's going to be a deck that I think is going to have a little bit of diminishing returns, as we are going to be losing some cards from that set as it rotates. Mainly one of their best options, and I'd say one of the best options, kind of handling the Corey Steel Cutter / token, decks and everything like that, and it kind of goes extends to the Orzhov self bounce decks in, of course, the name of the card that I can't think of. In Temporary Lockdown, that's the card. Temporary Lockdown does rotate when Edge of Eternities comes out, and I'm pretty sure there's not another major standard tournament necessarily coming up until about Edge of Eternities, where we do have rotation. And while Azorius Omniscience, I'm sure, is going to have some other tools to kind of replace that card, they still have things like Authority of the Consuls to help slow down some of the more aggressive draws from the mono red strategies and just the other aggro strategies in general. Just obviously, even though we've talked about Temporary Lockdown not being the perfect answer, because at least from Izzet's side, they can bounce it, they can reset all their things on a turn that they need it, and end up playing a bunch of spells and just saying, okay, even if you can replay it, you still took a ton of damage, and there's nothing that says otherwise that I couldn't just do the same thing the next turn and then kill you. Where Azorius Omniscience got to take full advantage of that by just playing it on turn 3, and even if you did do it, you had to spend resources and spells and things like that to actually deal with a Temporary Lockdown and then do your thing. You weren't going to kill me. Boom, I go off on turn 4, win the game. Super simple, on top of just being able to kind of tempo you out as well with a lot of my cheap interactive spells. Like I said, I think that this was probably the tournament for Azorius Omniscience to either win or do very well. And by metrics, still, it did pretty well. But, as far as making the top 8 and really making the top 16 with how many people actually registered the deck and, its share of the percentage of the metagame, it was pretty much a disappointment overall. And I think a deck that is going to have diminishing returns if you decide to kind of pick it up and play it through the standard, unless you're going to be playing a lot of standard leagues, or maybe in some standard challenges and things like that online, or maybe you have some local tournaments going on. As far as I know, there's not really that many local standard FNMs or just tournaments in general going on, except for Apex Gaming here in Ohio. They're probably going to have some standard events going on. But with that said, Azorius Omniscience probably not the best deck to kind of focus on going forward. It honestly might actually be the mono red or Is It Prowess decks that look poised to kind of continue to be the best decks after rotation. The last one we have, Standard Diversity. I think at this point, you have players that are playing different things because that's just kind of the thing to do. And I know a lot of people harp on it, and there's a lot of discourse, content creators shouldn't have ban lists, whatever. I'm not even talking about bannings. I just think that the diversity of Standard right now is pretty bad. I think Izzet is very clearly the best deck. There's the most play to it. It ends up kind of beating the rest of the field, and you have Mono Red that looks like it could just beat anybody at this point. Obviously, it's going to have some bad matchups. The white decks, I'm sure, are not all that friendly to the mono red aggro decks. But really, it's going to look like a lot of, VV Izzet decks, and then there's going to be a lot of these mono red aggro decks. And, we did see that it had quite a bit of metagame share over the course of the last few weeks between both decks. And in reality, a 2-deck standard format where players are well, yeah, competitive wise, you want there to be a homogenized kind of diversity or whatever. You want a homogenized metagame. That's the word I'm looking for. For a lot of these competitive tournaments, you want to know exactly what you're going to play, how you're going to tackle it, whatever. You don't want there to be 10 or 15 decks that you have to worry about, because it obviously becomes a lot harder to game plan for that, and it feels a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? It feels a lot more random there's a better word for it, but it feels more random, where it's like, man, I really prepared to see these 5 decks, and I saw the other 5 decks, and I ended up losing. And I think from a spectator standpoint, that's something that you want. You want to see like a different set of matches being played every round. You don't want to see mirror matches all the time. You don't want to see deck A versus deck B a lot of the time. So as far as the diversity of standard, and a lot of players will just say, but standard is supposed to be this way, where there's only like a few different decks. I personally don't like it. Even as a competitive player and kind of wanting a solid understanding, I want there to be at least a few more deck, like one more deck at the top at least, that we could argue, and you could even argue that maybe Azorius Omniscience is supposed to be that deck. I don't think that it is after the weekend that I had. Maybe there's some players that will have success with it, but I think that VV prowess decks and mono red aggro decks are here to stay, and those are just going to be kind of the normal things, and everyone else is going to be trying to play catch up and just kind of like conceding that like I maybe lose to this deck, but I can at least beat this one. So definitely, I guess, leave your thoughts of how you feel about the current standard format in the comments down below. But to me personally, I think that there isn't really that much standard diversity, and I don't think rotation is going to take enough out of the format to really affect like the top decks of the format. I think it's only going to hurt the other decks that look to try to use those cards as a form of advantage over these other super aggressive decks. So that's, my winners and losers from this. I don't think there's really a whole lot to go over there in terms of like the metagame and everything like that, and just the totality of the tournament. Normally I say that the players and like the spectators win, but I don't think anybody really wins from this tournament. There was a lot of what we expected going into this, and while it is a little unfortunate, definitely the way the top 8 ended up shaking out, again, was still like really cool how that worked out. So final thoughts, opinions, I guess I kind of shared a little bit of that. I mean, personally for me, I think that the standard diversity is pretty awful in terms of, the different decks that you go. I mean, there's a ton of different decks you can play. Don't get me wrong. Like there's, I guess, enough diversity in that like you can play these other decks, and I think that you can have varying levels of success. I think if you're just trying to win, which is kind of like the whole reason to play competitively, you want to win, right? I think really it's either Izzet or mono red, and then maybe on the fringes you have Azorius Omniscience if you can run really well. But I think that if you want a deck that is just consistent, no matter if you give like the highest of the best of draws or the worst of draws, whatever, I think you're probably honed in on like mono red or the Izzet prowess decks. I don't know if you necessarily want to be playing Azorius Omniscience in a format where mono red's killing you on turn 3 or turn 4 and punishing you for stumbling, and then the VV decks that are just absolute value machines that are just going to play a bunch of spells, ding you for a ton of damage just by playing their own creature, and then generating massive amounts of mana, getting you on the spell front and on the mana front. So personally for me, I don't quite enjoy where standard is right now. Maybe rotation will change things. Maybe Edge of Eternities will give us some other cool cards that we can kind of look forward to, which I do look forward to some more Edge of Eternity stuff as we kind of move closer to that standard release, and of course that Spotlight series that is going to be taking place, I believe, either that weekend or the weekend after, like very shortly after rotation. There's going to be a lot of hopefully cool decks that show up at that tournament. Of course, we're probably going to see a lot of this VV deck and mono red there. And yeah, I mean, overall, like the presentation, the event, and everything was fine. I just think the lack of diversity and things like that just weren't really that fun. But again, like the top 8, just the fact that we had a mini mono red bracket, Izzet prowess bracket, and then they both met up in the finals was really cool. But, that's kind of my thoughts and opinions. Overall, Final Fantasy is really cool. The limited format looked awesome. As always, Wizards just completely nailing the limited format on the head and just being all-time bangers. And on top of that, standard for competitive players probably looks pretty good. Just, having to worry about 2 or 3 different decks, and you can just kind of figure out the rest. From a spectator standpoint, I don't think standard is in a pretty cool spot. And even like in a brewer's position, I don't think standard is necessarily in that great of a spot. But, of course, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like on the video. If you didn't enjoy something, leave a dislike, and then, of course, yell at me in the comments down below, as people seem to like to do. And, of course, again, subscribe to the channel. Check out all the links in the description down below. Leave your thoughts for the Pro Tour Final Fantasy in the comments down below. That's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.